3 gazing around the corner, it's time to finally throw out my speculations and guesses into the wind. So today, welcome to ASTER'S Speculations for Act 3, where I'll basically be dumping my thoughts on the lingering questions and possibilities to come for the Fontaine Archon quest. Disclaimer: these are all just speculations and theories that I mostly thought of with varying degrees of rationale and evidence. Some of these were just thoughts that I had while playing the Archon quest, some are from the last 2 videos I made that didn't really get articulated separately, but these speculations are definitely not unique or original, and I'm actually curious if you guys have contradictory or correlating ideas to the stuff on the list. So take this as the initial jumping point for the discussion instead of the end-all be-all. Anyway, let's begin. Number 1 is Lyney will be Arlecchino's successor for the hotel. This speculation is based off the ominous line in Lyney's new character card description regarding Arlecchino's thoughts on the child eventually succeeding the parent, as well as Lyney's current role in the House of the Hearth as being the reliable core of which the hotel revolves around of. Succession by combat was also a recognized method when it came to the position of Harbinger status and the corresponding prestige. I remember when I went back to the World Quest, a very special fortune slip to get more information on Lyney specifically, there was a mention by Chitosev that several years ago, the title knave changed hands when the previous knave and a certain child had a serious clash. There are Fatui agents that clearly did not appreciate the change and still act upon the previous knave's directives, which potentially includes Efim Snežević, an instructor of the House of the Hearth. Now, I wonder if Lyney is meant to replace Arlecchino as a successor in the event that something were to happen to her. I don't believe that Arlecchino, as a character, is ultimately altruistic, as Femine does mention that father can be quite distant. Lynette does mention that there currently exist agendas revolving around herself and her brother that are of top security. And the next speculation that I have is that Lyney will have to confront Arlecchino and eventually succeed her as the core of the House of the Hearth. Whether this is by trial to the death or simply succession is up for debate though. Lyney does seem to be watched over diligently by the knave, though, as she was willing to assist him in his magic show as well as dissuade him from getting a delusion. While those can be attempts by Arlecchino to garner trust with Lyney, I like to think that she values the sentiment of family for the sake of the children, or at least the bonds that it offers and the value of camaraderie, trust, and justice, which can be its own bargaining chip, but I'm not going to say anything else. Now we move on to the more questionable part of the speculation, and this speculation is based on the really ominous themes that are present in Lyney's second character card description. The House of the Hearth at the moment doesn't have any ulterior motives that we know of besides the agenda with the prophecy, but it would be quite symbolic for someone as flawed but compassionate as Lyney to replace someone seemingly cold and articulated as Arlecchino, through a trial by combat. I don't think this will be a matter of hostility or animosity, because the lore does paint that Arlecchino's current position as the father has helped the children through the hardships imposed by the previous knave. Femine's lines about the father shows this to be the case, that while Arlecchino was one to dissuade emotions and weaknesses, Arlecchino's new position did improve the philosophy that the children lived by. Father said that every one of the children is important, that they have value in their own lives, to be their strongest selves, and to stand on their own 2 feet in the world. Lynette also mentions that it is only because of father that home felt like home. The House of the Hearth is filled with very flawed people, but there is a sense of family and camaraderie present that is genuine, which is why I do believe that Arlecchino choosing Lyney to succeed her and how she will adjudicate the transition wouldn't be too cruel. I really hope that she doesn't force Lyney to choose between his family or the well-being of Fontaine, and that the House of the Hearth's operations are genuine in trying to bypass the prophecy. And while the ones that we know of have been relatively amicable, it's naive to say that Arlecchino and Lyney, Lynette, and Femine don't have any ulterior motives when it comes to the prophecy and how the children are being utilized as basically soldiers. Because the children, while they're given a seemingly loving home, they're still operatives that carry out missions and tasks given by the Fatui and the house. I'm sure that the decision to pick Lyney as a successor is not only sentimental, but also practical. But my question is, why would Arlecchino need a successor in the first place? Besides a thematic parallel that could be a good conclusion to her story, there is no immediate threat to the House of the Hearth that would constitute a needed successor. In my opinion, I think it's more so of that Arlecchino thinking that Lyney is worthy upon meeting him, and that it's more of a contingency rather than an immediate threat. So the real question is that when the Traveler goes against the house, are we going to fight Lyney? As hospitable as he is, I think that when push comes to shove, for example, Lynette getting threatened or Femine being put in danger, Lyney would prioritize his position as a Fatui agent for the sake of the family. And I wonder, how that's going to work in the future. Number 2 is that Arlecchino will be introduced as a quote-unquote good guy. Now this is one that I actually wanted to fully expand in a future video, and it's a speculation that Arlecchino would be introduced in the story as protagonist. Now, there's a very important distinction when it comes to narrative roles in any kind of story. Just because you're a protagonist doesn't mean you're a good person, and just because you're an antagonist doesn't mean you're a bad person. And this extends to Arlecchino. The current state of Fontaine's story has actually set up the Fatui as the underdogs, being quote-unquote mistreated by the current systems of the law. The clearest example is Lyney's framing for a crime that he didn't commit, where his status as a Fatui agent was used as evidence in court, which swayed the opinion of the Oratrice against his case despite his innocence. This is further exemplified by Tartaglia's framing. Now, it's not to say that the Fatui is this altruistic organization that's spotless, because let's not lie to ourselves, but the current story is attempting to paint them as the underdogs being used as scapegoats in the grand convoluted justice system of Fontaine. It also doesn't help that the current knowledge we have of the plans of the Fatui constitute the quote-unquote salvation of Fontaine from the prophecy, or at least according to Lyney, which is a very flawed perspective. So my speculation is that the story would introduce Arlecchino and the House of the Hearth as allies initially, in which the traveler is forced to comply with them in a way that either keeps the safety of Fontaine or the justice in a land of strict laws and prejudice. Now, will this be a permanent alliance? I doubt it. There's something ominous about how they're trying to look into the Oratrice and the Gnostic power of the Hydro Archon. It also doesn't help that 2 other Fatui harbingers, ex or otherwise, are wary of Arlecchino. So while she would appear amicable and serve the best interests for the people of Fontaine, or she doesn't want to make the children cry, I also do think that Arlecchino cannot be trusted. I really think that she has her own agenda. My speculation is a bit pessimistic on her end, but it's partly because I don't doubt that the Fontaine Archon quest would make the story that easy, considering that it all seems too good to be true that the Fatui wants to quote-unquote save Fontaine. I genuinely think there's still so many pieces of the puzzle that we need to see in the future, but at least for now, my speculation is that Arlecchino will be quote-unquote helping us out. Number 3 is breaking out Tartaglia and entering the Fortress of Meropide. With the Administrator himself being a playable character, I'm curious how we're going to incorporate him into the story. A part of me actually wants to see a heist or a prison breakout for Tartaglia, and while I know that the legalese and administrative work is part of Fontaine's story, I want to see more action in the good old classic prison break. We also need to address Tartaglia's vision being kind of funky, and especially the role of Hydro as a living entity instead of just an element. There's so much mystery about Tartaglia's vision that I hope we can tackle in the new stories. He's one of the rare characters that doesn't have a vision story. Hell, Venti has a vision story and his vision is fake. But I'm really excited to see what he has in store for us. I also do wonder if Tartaglia's imprisonment is intentional, or if there's more implication to Tartaglia being in a place surrounded by criminals, considering he's not exactly the most pacifist of people. I wonder if Tartaglia is the kind of person to establish a hierarchy within the prison system. I don't know, like a gang or something? I have no idea. But we still need to connect Tartaglia's past with the missing lore of the Rain. And speaking of Rain, number 4 is Confronting the Prophecy and the History of Old Fontaine. Now, I'm actually super curious what the prophecy means. Surely we can't just nuke the entirety of Fontaine and wipe it from the map. But I very much hope that we'll understand what happened with Old Fontaine and the ancient ruins underwater further in the Archon quest. Fontaine had a really big transition for the technological advancements to start kicking in. And my other question is whether the prophecy is true. Sure, we're getting the disintegration of people into water, but the prophecy is just that. We don't even know where it came from. So those are 2 very important questions to consider. I do hope that we also confront Farina in the future about all of this, considering that she seems to be horribly worried about it, but just doesn't want to show it to the public. There are several thoughts that I have when it comes to the legitimacy of the prophecy. The thought of everyone being turned into water feels too literal and too extreme of a stake. So my guess is one of 3. First, the current interpretation that people have for the prophecy is incorrect, or at least either hyperbolic or really pessimistic. It's not meant to be an end-all be-all apocalyptic prophecy, but rather for something more symbolic. Maybe the theme of unification through water, similar to the Kasha terminal banding the people against the Scaramouche. Or maybe even the unification of the people's beliefs in the true justice against the Hydro Archon's theatrics. Hence why she is all alone on the throne. Well, that's just one of the guesses. The second one is that this is a literal prophecy, and our mission for the next Archon quest is to find the reversal of it to save Fontaine. The third guess is that the prophecy itself is a lie, an artificial ploy to rouse panic amongst the Fontainians to weaken their trust in their Archon or their general public safety. I I do genuinely wonder what the motive of that one would be, but we're going to need to wait and see. Though there's a lot more possibilities out there, especially since we have yet to actually talk to Furina without getting antagonized. Genshin liked its symbolisms though. Do you remember when Dottore was seen burning down the Irminsul, but we never really got that scene in the Archon quest? That being the case for Furina isn't out of the question either. Improbable, but not impossible. Number 5 is confronting the Chief Justice and knowing the truth of his origins as the Dragon of Water. If Neuvillette is not the Dragon of Water, I will genuinely cut off my hand and serve it on a silver platter for someone's consumption. The current foreshadowing and old foreshadowing in lore long ago has definitely supported the theory that Neuvillette is not only inhuman, but also the Dragon of Water. With what the Tears in the Sky fairy tale from Fremine and the prophecy from the Bolt Eater Baptismal Bishops that the new form taken by the Dragon of Water will be in the form of a human. Neuvillette's manner of speaking also bears the air of extraordinary, in a way that he refers to humans as another species altogether and finds the irrationality of emotions coinciding with the finality of justice to be a curious mannerism of humanity. So at the very least, if Neuvillette wasn't the dragon, he's at the bare minimum not human. But I would be so disappointed. It would be really unfortunate if he wasn't, considering that we'd have a direct primary source regarding the more ancient aspects of Fontainian lore. The fascinating relationship between the primordial creatures and the current Archons was somewhat explained in Sumeru with Apep and Nahida, but if Neuvillette really was the Dragon of Water, I wonder why he decided to help out with Fontaine. And I hope that we also get some lore about Tevat's planet before the coming of the primordial one. I don't think we ever got a true name for the planet Tevat is on, so I hope we can ask him all those spicy questions when we get the chance. But I'm more interested in whether he knows anything about the coming of the primordial one, or if his birth into the new generation would have wiped him clean of any memories, considering he would still be young by dragon standards. I'll explore this in another video soon though, so check out for that. Number 6 is understanding the truth about the Oratrice and justice in general. Genshin in fact loves to have this thing where the ideal of the Archon is tested against the actual reality of life. And the Oratrice and the concept of justice are definitely things that we need to consider for the Fontaine Archon quest. The Oratrice and the manufacturing of Indemnitium hasn't been fully covered yet in the current lore of Fontaine, and as such, I wonder if they're going to dive further into this with the Archon quest. Lyney was tampering with something in the Oratrice, so it's definitely an object of interest. We also know that he heard a voice while he was down there, and that the Oratrice allegedly has a consciousness that dictates the verdict it gives to the people. But another one is that the concept of justice is also closely tied to the people's perception of it, which only begs a deeper question if the Oratrice itself can be manipulated to fit whatever the people need it to fit. So the ending question for the Archon quest would revolve around the lines of what is justice? Is it the legal jurisdiction that authorities hold that dictate it, or the laws of the land, or maybe that people's perceptions and individual interpretations melded together to form a uniform definition of what justice is? I don't know. I also wonder what its relationship with the evidence presented in court and the justification that it has to be a spectacle. What would happen if a trial were to happen in isolation where there's no spectating crowd? Would the Oratrice's verdict be compromised, or is that the quote-unquote truest version of the Oratrice because it doesn't have any possible external influences? I also wonder if the Gnosis is with the Oratrice instead of Furina. Why that would be the case is currently unknown, but the Gnosis powering the creation of Indemnitium would be a cool plot point. The Gnosis haven't really been the strongest narrative devices in Genshin, and honestly, how it's being used in the story is getting really stale. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I wish they'd do something more with the Gnosis instead of them just being the afterthought, especially since they're supposed to be powerful artifacts. But that's it for me today. This is more so a surface level speculation that I literally just did while I was trying to get some sleep, but I'm actually going to be expanding on these theories one by one because I actually have a lot of ideas that I want to say for them. This is more so a preliminary video to start off stuff because I'm starting classes and I want to start off this semester productive. Anyway, what's your thoughts on the upcoming Act 3, or well, 4.1? Anyway, my name is Aster and thank you for chilling with me, and I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I will be seeing you very soon. Bye-bye! With... My god, I have not recorded for so long and you can tell it from my voice. With Act 3 gazing around the corner, it's time to finally throw out my speculations and guesses into the wind. I think my mic kind of broke on that one, so...